Welcome to the Zyrrah Generation Podcast. Introducing Michael Torto, a 7-time tech CEO straight from the East Coast of the USA, and Sue Jauncey, world-renowned registered psychologist and founder of Zyrrah, all the way from the West Coast of Australia. One of them has spent a career building companies. The other has spent 30 years inside the human mind. And together, we are going to explore what makes people truly happy. Welcome to the Zyrrah Generation Podcast.
Good evening, Sue.
And good morning, Michael, from the East Coast of the United States.
And we are the Zyrrah Generation Podcast. You'll see by our backgrounds today, we're in two different studios. Obviously, being on the West Coast of Australia and the East Coast of the United States. And sometimes we'll be in different locations with different backgrounds, bringing you important information about happiness. Sue, last week, we talked a little bit about Zyrrah as an app that we are launching to support people's happiness. We talked a little bit about what led us to build this application and the whole human universals. And today I'd like to drill down with you a little bit more on what those human universals are, why they're important. And then I want to get to the main topic that we've talked about, which is for today, the stories that we tell ourselves. Why do we tell ourselves these different stories? And what is the impact of what we are putting in our own minds about what we believe is going to be true or not true?
Yeah. Yes, Michael, look, let's just do a little bit of a recap, if you like, around the human universals. So why I'm so keen on building a community for the people that are keen to become part of the Zyrrah generation is it's for all those people that really want to get a better understanding of why they respond and react in the way that they do, and to understand a little bit more about how the brain and the mind work, because that's something they don't teach you in school, isn't it, Michael? You learn all about geography and history and how to read and write and mathematics, but they don't teach us anything about understanding how our mind and brain work. So therefore, we become vulnerable and susceptible to just all the messages that we're receiving and consuming that shapes the way that we see the world and how we respond in the world. So what I'm really on around the human universal concept is it addresses the way human is wired. So it does not matter what job you have, what culture you come from, where you live in the world, your age. It transcends Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, because baby boomers, because we are dealing with the way human is wired. So as we have these conversations, Michael, if we're discussing human universal principles, it should resonate with everyone, regardless of your generation.
And so, Sue, if you're saying that we are not aware of that, we're not taught these things,
No.
is Zyrrah, is what you're trying to put into this app to expose those human universals
Correct.
to the users?
Absolutely, because if you understand how the mind works and the brain chemistry that we have, and this is for everyone, it's in layman terms, if you like, and it's the way humans live, and to the degree that we are satisfied with our life and, the quality of life, etc., that we live. So there's the bit around the human universals, and it's the way a person is wired. We're going to continue to explore what these universals are all about and what it means over the various podcasts. But we're going to need to do some deep diving into some of the topics so people can begin to understand why the brain is producing what it's producing, and how we can have a choice in terms of what we feed into the brain so that we can have the best life experience possible, because what's the alternative? And I think just to set this up a little bit more is last week, I think we talked about the continuum, that humans operate off a continuum, happy, sad, good, bad, all of those sorts of things. And it's not linear. We can move up and down, this continuum. And it's important to know that, Michael, because that opens up the concept that we say to people all the time, you can actually choose how much happiness you want in your life. You get to choose. Now, what's fascinating about this, on a continuum, you can be unhappy and you can be happy, right? But if you want to go up to the far end of ultimate joy, oftentimes the human body cannot take that. It's too much, too much joy. And I've watched people with us where it's like, shut it down. It's too
Give an
overwhelming.
example, Sue. Yeah, give an example of your experience with that. So I don't think even for the audience, and when we talked about that before, I could really grasp, how is it possible you can have too much happiness?
Yeah.
Well, how is that
Well,
happen?
on the continuum, when you've had something happen in your life and you've been so sad and so much in pain that you can't function properly. You don't want to get out of bed and you can't go into work the next day and you can't focus. And it's just you would do anything for that pain to go away. It might be through a broken relationship or a business or something, but you feel like you're so sad and so unhappy with a set of circumstances that you're living through at the moment. And all you want is for that pain to go away, okay, and that feeling to go away. Well, if you imagine a continuum, you've got to have equal parts, okay? So for some people, and I've watched a client happen with this once when we cracked through their defense mechanisms and they got a feeling of pure joy, okay? And we all have that, but when we do get a feeling of pure joy, it kind of spikes. Yeah, and then it starts to recede back, in terms of what it's doing. But if you can imagine, if we get pure joy, it takes over it runs through our veins and our body and the hormones that we are producing as a result of it. It becomes just as overwhelming to us as what the pain can be at the other end. And we're not asking people to live in that state because it's too much. You can be just somewhere on the continuum. But what we are saying is there is a choice around where you want to be on that continuum and how much happiness you want to experience in your lifetime. So right now, most people, generalizing, Michael, most people don't really understand that they are choosing on a day-to-day basis the happiness that they want, because they will tell you, but you're just responding to the situation that you're in. And how can you be happy in that situation when it's unfair and it shouldn't have happened and they're getting away with it and they did that to me and this happened and I'm never chosen and I'm never accepted. And so how can you be happy in those situations? Not realizing that in those situations, it's the story that we are telling ourselves that is determining how we feel about a situation. So the situation itself, non-emotional, non-discriminative. I'm going to give you a very silly example here so we can see this thing play out. I often talk to people about the sun rises and sets every day, okay? It's just doing its thing.
Watching it now.
Beautiful. You just put a blind down because there was a bit too much sun coming in and whatever, but the sun's just doing its thing. It's non-discriminative, non-emotional, just doing its thing. To this day, I have some people say to me, especially those that live in Australia, say to me, I hate the sun. I get too hot. I get short-tempered, not very tolerant. I sweat too much with it. And you can get melanoma and die. I hate the sun. I'd prefer winter. They really do. Come to Australia. We all know about melanoma. And you get other people that say, I love the sun. I get vitamin A. I get vitamin D. I feel like more opportunities available to me. I have a spring in my step. I can't wait to get outside. I love the sun. The sun is just doing its thing. But the story we tell ourselves and the way we judge it will depend on how we experience it and how we feel about it. Now, both exist, though. This is important. Both exist. Can you get melanoma from the sun? Yes, you can. Do you get vitamin A and D from the sun? Yes, you do.
Well,
So,
everything in life has risk, right? I mean, if you think about it, everything. I'm going to go make a sandwich. It's
yeah,
going to be a tasty sandwich, but I could choke. I mean, I
yeah,
could. So everything what you're describing is that balance and the attitude which you go into. But let me ask you a more extreme example, because that is what we're talking about today, the story that we tell ourselves. I can tell you, I have told myself stories so many times that they weren't even remotely going to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And then you set yourself down a path. And if you're actually telling that story that involves another human being that you're
Mm-hmm.
in conflict with, now I'm going through all of these things that he or she is, I think that they're thinking, and I'm winding myself up for a situation that I'm creating and never existed. But to your
Correct.
point back just for a minute on an example, and I'll just share this. I have a daughter going through a very difficult breakup right now. Very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. She has
Mm-hmm.
become frozen. In her
Mm-hmm.
brain, she can't separate the incident or the situation, which is just factual, not emotional, and then the emotion, because she's been telling her story that her relationship was something that it wasn't. And any of us on the outside could see that the relationship isn't. But she keeps telling her this story over and over and over, and she can't get out of it. So in that more extreme example, how does a person use and choose happiness in that situation?
Well, it's the way you go through the process. So a breakup of a relationship, you're supposed to feel sad about. Well, put it this way, it depends which party you are. Some might feel happy to end a relationship and some might
Right?
feel sad to end a relationship. But in the case of if it's somebody that's feeling sad when they've ended a relationship, that is perfectly, you are supposed to feel sad. So we're not saying you're in a happy state all of the time. You're going to experience all those emotions. But depending on that continuum versus happy, sad, it also depends whether you're going to be personalizing, which is seeing the world through a lens of threat versus of the perspective you've got and how objective you can be about something, another two ends of the continuum. So if you're at the end of the continuum where you've got the broken heart, okay, and a broken heart is painful to experience and to go through. And there's no shortcuts of getting through it. It's a process that you need to go through, when you're ending a relationship. The issue, though, becomes instead of us being able to move through this process in a relationship, we often prolong the process of the relationship because of the stories we're telling ourselves about the relationship. So when I'm dealing with people around relationship breakdowns, almost on every occasion, Michael, they want to tell me all about the other person. They want to tell me what the other person said, and that means that they loved me when they said that, didn't they? And
Mhm,
the
mhm.
person did this, and why did they behave that way? And if they didn't behave that way, and it was fair of me, wasn't it, to want to change their behavior, by the way, because they should have been behaving in the way that I feel a human should behave. And every counseling session or every session that I have with these people, they focus completely on the other person, okay, which happens in heartbreak. Can also be a little to do with attachment theory. We feel rejected when it happens. We don't like the feeling of rejection and the pain. And then sometimes we use those stories to say, see, I've been rejected again. This is me. I can't attract the right people. And there's something, wrong with me. But initially, what they're doing is they're still trying to understand the other person and change the other person and focus, and they don't want to break the connection. So even when they are feeling pain, they still have a connection when they continue to talk about this other person and talk about the event that's happened with them. But it prolongs the process. So when I'm working with these people, it's like, I get that, and I can see why you feel the way that you do when this person did this and this happens. But why don't we put this person to one side now, and let's talk about your response to the situation. Let's talk about the way you feel in this situation. Let's talk about what you were like in this relationship and the stories you were telling me. Now, at first, they kind of just blink a little when you're asking them this, and it takes about 2 sentences before they're going back to what that person did. And they want to work out why they behave that way and
Right.
let me understand their profile and what would I have to do or say? And all the while in their mind, they're trying to work out a way to get back to this person because, in a sense, that's going to make, in their mind, that's going to make the pain go away. And then even those that do go back, for a second, they get really excited and it's like, oh, thank goodness I'm back in the relationship. But then a little bit of dread comes in as well. And it's like,
Yes.
oh my goodness, I'm back here again. Now what am I
Yes.
going to do? And we start going through a cycle. But the point we started to talk about on this one was the stories that we tell ourselves. Okay. So our story is, I need to focus. I'm not going to focus on my own self and who I was in this relationship. I need to understand this other person and why it happened. I need to know more about this other person and understand their personality profile and understand what makes them tick so I can understand why this relationship didn't work. Okay.
Yes.
And then we want to still remain connected in this relationship in terms of what we're doing. So I had a situation once, Michael, where someone came to me. I'd been working with them in terms of, bringing them through the broken heart and the attachment that they had. They were codependent, with this person and bringing them through. And they came to me this day and said, oh, I'm feeling much better now. And they were having moments when they were feeling better, but they had not disconnected. And they said to me, I would really like to go and report this person for their behaviors and what they did to me at the time. So I said, okay. I said, I tell you what. And they wanted me to go with them to the police station and make the report. So I said, I tell you what I'll do. When we know that you are no longer connected to this person, I'll be the first person to go with you to report this behavior. But while I know that you are using this as another strategy to stay connected to this person, I can't be a part of that in what you're doing. And so exactly what I thought would happen, this person went through the process, they got over it. And when they got over it,
You didn't
they
want to
had
do it, did they?
no interest whatsoever in doing it.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Isn't
But
that fascinating?
whilst they were looking for another hook to be able to stay,
Yes.
which makes the pain last longer, but they don't care about the pain lasting longer or the drama. It was more fearful of letting go, because then I have to be with myself and deal with myself. And what do I do with that? Once they'd broken the connection, they no longer had the desire or the need to do anything around that. So what we want is for people to feel the pain, feel the grief. And the more we allow ourselves to feel the pain and feel the grief without judgment, without trying to work out why or understand what's going on, you will come through that process easier or quicker, when we come through the process. So the other end of the continuum is we need to maintain perspective and objectivity. What I was telling you about was just purely emotional responses.
Right.
And hooks to keep people in, because the real fear was letting go of the relationship. And what am I going to do with that space? And how am I going to deal with the pain, of letting go? So the stories are, I don't like this pain. I need to remain connected. And any sort of conversation that they're having around this other person keeps that connection going.
So let's talk then about some more specific stories where we tell ourselves something that may or may not be valid. And what does that do to our brain and the situation that we're getting ourselves into? Because I think about even things that have applied even in the workplace, where I'm gearing up for a big meeting. Prior to this meeting, there's been a lot of contention by each of the individuals coming to this meeting. There's going to be a big debate. And I would spend the whole evening saying, oh, I know what Mark's coming to this meeting. He's going to do. The first thing he's going to do is he's going to interrupt everybody else. And then I'm going to get all agitated by that. And I'm going to have to kick him out of the room. And the meeting happens. Mark didn't even open his mouth for the first 30 minutes. But I was all prepared, and I was worked up the whole night thinking I'm going to have to deal with him first. Why do we do that?
Well, it's a survival mechanism that we have as well. But let's go to the actual basics of this. So as a psychologist, I'm always saying to people, if you want to take care of yourself, one of the first things to consider is be very, very careful of the stories you're telling yourself, and be careful of what you are consuming. Because what you consume and which means what you're exposed to, the information that you're seeing and what you're taking on board, and the stories that you tell yourself about that where you focus and what you consume on an ongoing basis is how you are eventually going to see the world, and it will manifest to the point that if anything else happens outside of that, you will have what we call cognitive blindness to that. You won't even see it because you're so focused on that particular story. We call it a
Yes.
frame of reference to live in the world. You've got that story. So we need to understand the basics. And so that's part of the choice, okay, around living the best life possible is choose the stories you want to tell yourself and choose what you're going to consume. So in your example, Michael, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to spend the evening feeling tense, anxious, ruminating, going over in your head what such and such is going to do in the meeting the next day and what you're prepared for, and I'm going to have all my answers ready, and I'm not going to let this do, and I'm going to show this person up, and I'm going to show him for who he is, or whatever the case may be. You don't sleep well. You're overproducing cortisol, the stress hormone. None of that is good for you. You go to the meeting the next day. This person doesn't even say a word, okay?
Right.
And you just stole from yourself the
Yes.
night before because of the story you're telling yourself and what you're consuming. So what we're saying when you choose happiness, okay, is that, or you want to choose to have the best work-life experience possible, or just a life experience, what we're saying is keep perspective and remain objective around what's going on. You can notice that you feel a bit nervous about something or you've got some history, but that's to give you a piece of awareness. Because something happened in the past does not mean it's going to happen again. You can go into any situation as a new start, and you
So
get to choose.
some people will say history is the best predictor of the future. What you're saying
Yeah.
kind of negates that, right? Is that the more pessimistic
I'm
viewpoint?
saying history allows you to choose what you would do differently next time.
See, I like that so much better.
Yeah.
Because again, I think it's that pessimistic adage that, it's the best predictor. So just avoid it. And I
Yeah.
like what you're saying, because you're saying there were lessons to be learned so I don't make the same mistake again, or I don't get myself in that situation again,
Yeah.
or even I know how to handle it better than I did
Yeah.
before.
Well, yeah, I guess I'd put it too this way, that everything is just an experience. We get to add what we want to that experience. We get to choose what that experience was. Was it helpful? Was it harmful? Did
Yes.
we enjoy it? Did we not enjoy it? We get to determine what that experience is. But when history, if it comes around and we got another meeting, the mistake we made is, oh, gee, I know how this meeting went last time. This is not going to be good. Now I'm nervous. Things aren't going to go well. And, all of this sort of thing. Versus, well, given what happened at the last meeting, I want to go in just prepared with a set of questions to be able to find out a little more or explore a little more about it. And then what opportunities would be available to us in this. And then instead of losing, getting anxious and having it steal from your quality of life or contentment, you start to get excited thinking about the opportunities and the questions that we can ask.
So I think you just brought up two very important things. The first is the information that we consume every day absolutely has an effect. I have lived it. I'm a user now of Zyrrah myself. It exposes some of this stuff to me that I don't need to be consuming all of this information every day that is not helpful. So that's so important to me. But then the second thing really is, how do you get your brain trained? What are the things that you can do to get that brain trained? Because it's good information that we're sharing here, but I'm 63 years old. I've been kind of set in a way. I think this way. I tell myself these stories. How do I get out of that pattern and change my brain? Is it, if I want to get bigger muscles, I go to the gym and I work out. And I know if I stop working out, my skinny arms are going to come back. So if I want to keep that shape and I want to stay in shape, I know I have to continue to do that. But how do we do that today? What can we do?
Well, you see, there's one of the continuums we talk to. You've got conscious awareness, so awareness versus the other end is automatic. So what we're doing with the zyrrah generation is teaching people around how the brain works, or sharing and exploring, how the brain works and the choices that you do have available to you. So in this first instance, in order to change something from being automatic, when you're driving a car and you have no idea how you got there because you drove it so automatically, you can't remember putting your
Yes.
foot on the accelerator or doing what. And then, like, I'm going over to Canada very soon, and you're driving on the opposite side of the road. I've got to think about every little thing that I'm doing
Yes.
driving the car, or I'm going to be driving on the wrong side of the road.
Especially when you get in that roundabout.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get completely confused. But now there's some things that we're meant to do on automatic, because you can't be thinking about all of those details. We wouldn't be able to function as a human if you've got to keep going through those details. But if you want to change the way all the messages, Michael, that you were ever given as a child about who you are, where you were born, how the world works, what to expect, how you fit in, and all of those sorts of things, you didn't necessarily choose them. You were exposed, you consumed it, and they become automatic responses and an automatic frame of reference in the way that you see the world. So how we begin to change this is through raising our level of awareness. So here's easy steps to do. We start to know that the way we respond automatically and the way we feel is a learned automatic response.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can say, if I understand that some of my responses are automatic, I can start to choose how I want to respond. That often gives people a little flutter of excitement to know I can actually choose what I want to do and how I respond to this. It doesn't happen overnight, Michael. The awareness needs to build and grow, and we need to experiment, apply, and see what happens to the outcome.
And are you saying that that feeling I get, especially when it is the outcome I'm expecting, that feeling is what I want to repeat? So it's like that working out. Now I feel good. I feel like I'm getting strength. I want to keep that feeling going. So I'm training myself. And you're saying we can train our brain the same way.
Absolutely. It's there for the taking. So when you're worried about your skinny arms, you get cortisol. When you've done your training and you're happy with the effort you put in and what you did, you get the oxytocin, that you're coming, and the oxytocin feels good in terms of what you're doing. So in this first instance, if you're someone that feels like this always happens to me in my life, this continues to repeat itself, and here we go again, and this is how people see me, this is all part of the stories and the automatic response that we've had. You look at this like parallel universes on the continuum. That can be real, and it can exist, and you can live a life through that lens. But the other side of it exists also. The things that you are capable of, the opportunities, the freedom, the ability to be able to explore and choose, to remain objective. So think about this little like a staircase in what you're doing. Each step you take around asking a question, is there more to this than just the story I'm telling myself? Is there another way of responding to this, which is better for me and better for everybody else? Is there more that I can experience than what I'm currently experiencing? Every time you ask yourself that question, it's like walking up the next step. As you walk up that next step, your perspective starts to grow. And instead of being down here and going, this is life, this is the way it's always going to be, and I'm never going to see anything different, as your perspective grows, each step you take, so does your confidence, so does your curiosity, and you're wanting to know what else there is. And, is there another way of living life? Because I can promise you there are unlimited ways of living life and what you experience. And then perspective gives you freedom.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and I love that, Sue. I love perspective gives you freedom.
yeah. If you want to live a life where you get to the end of your life and you go, wow, that was such a ride, and if you want to live the best quality of life possible for you, if you want to feel contented. And contentment is a form of happiness, okay? Where you just love what you've got in your life. You're grateful, you're contented. It's no matter what circumstances are and whatever it is that you're doing. When you continue to walk those steps, you can only get there and to have that sense of contentment the more you're able to ask the questions, grow your perspective, and remain objective.
And
Be
I
an
think your
observer.
point about asking questions is so important. I just had that discussion with someone in my personal life yesterday where I had to apologize because I did work up in my head what this person's reaction was going to be when I had to deliver a certain amount of information, some news to them that they weren't going to be happy by. So I worked this thing up in my head, and I told myself this is a story and this is the way they're going to react. And they did not react like that whatsoever. And sometimes they will. Sometimes it
Human.
is the story that I did tell. But then what I had to apologize for was instead of just coming right back at you with my defense mechanisms, I should have asked, well, why did you say that to me? Or why did you do that? Or what was behind? What was your thinking? If I started with questions, then it
Yeah.
would have possibly been a whole different story than I had pre-created. And I
Yeah.
want to get just one example too, Sue, because I probably did this subconsciously, but I know the effect you're talking about when you hit that oxytocin.
Mm.
And just real quickly, in the business world, there's a lot of disappointments, especially when you're trying to sell a product or service and you're trying to make things take off. And I was running a company where I was selling to a very, very large shipping company client. And I brought my VP of sales with me, and we had a meeting all set up with the chief technology officer. We had waited months to get this meeting. Long story short, his assistant kept us in the waiting room for 4 hours. Not a word where this guy was, nothing. And then we get the notice, okay, he's free to see you. And he tells us, I only have 5 minutes. We were supposed to go through a whole presentation, and we actually had the anticipation we were going to get the contract signed that day. My VP of sales was livid. He didn't want to sign the contract. It only had 5 minutes. We had flown 4 hours to get there. We waited 4 hours in the waiting room. You can imagine the stories we're telling ourselves on the way home. And one of the stories my VP was telling me out loud was he never had any intention of doing this. He's not going to do a contract. We've wasted our time. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And I subconsciously am listening to this, and I'm on the window seat of the plane, and I'm looking out over the the mountains of Tennessee. And I turned to him and I said, Jay, what is the worst that's going to happen here? We don't get the deal. But if we go into it this way, we'll never get the deal because we are self-sabotaging ourselves. We're telling ourselves a story that may or may not be true. Because you know what we didn't do? We didn't ask this guy, well, why are you late? Or why did you keep us waiting 4 hours? Why didn't we ask those questions?
Yeah.
Because maybe there's a bigger story. Long story short, Jay's telling one story. I'm now actually getting a rise in oxytocin. At the time, I don't know what this oxytocin is or what it does, but I like the feeling because now I'm kind of jazzed up that I want to solve the problem. And I
Yeah.
actually feel good about it. So I'm making the choice to say, hey,
Yeah.
I'm getting excited because this is a challenge. And I like
Yeah.
challenges. So let me turn
Yeah.
that challenge into something positive. Long
Mm.
story short, we got the deal 3 months later, big,
Yeah.
huge contract. And if I had jumped on board Jay's
Yeah.
story,
So the excitement was when you were saying, what's the opportunity here? That sentence will have you feeling happier. I also want to circle back to the relationship. Okay. So if we're using perspective and objectivity, when you're feeling like you've got the broken heart and you're trying to work the other person out and the pain just continues, and it feels justified, we could be asking ourselves a question, or we could be saying to ourselves, is it possible that if this relationship was healthy and good for us, we would still be in it? The fact that we're not in it tells us there was something that wasn't working.
right.
Okay. That's objectivity and perspective. We could be saying things like, if I'm honest with myself, what were the things that were not working well in this relationship? And you could make a list around that, if I'm honest with myself. It's not going to stop you straight away from trying to think about the other person, but can you imagine in a counseling session, Michael, when someone's talking about the other person, they said that, they did this, why would they do that? This is what they shouldn't be doing. And their frustration and their emotions are getting more, hyped and wired. But imagine how effective the session can be if we're talking about things like, well, if this was a really connected meeting of the minds and we were both respectful of one another and there was that love between the two of us, then we wouldn't have broken up. So what maybe was going on in the relationship from both sides? So if I just talked about you for a moment, tell me the things that didn't work so well in the relationship for you.
Right.
Tell me the patterns that happened. And so when you start working through those issues and talking to them and get we still feel the pain of a breakup, but more often than not, it's our attachment style that is creating the pain that we're feeling and the stories and the reinforcement. But if we bring that objectivity in and we keep writing it down and we keep looking at it, because the truth of the matter is, if that relationship was the one, you were both loving and healthy and respectful of one another, you wouldn't have broken up,
Right.
in terms of, and it's a different process, mind you, if our partner dies and we go through a grief
Yes.
process, that's another process again that we go through that you can't control with that. But you get what I'm saying about perspective and
Perspective
questions.
and that objectivity it's difficult when you're in those situations, especially the one you're describing, to be objective with yourself. But that, again, I go back to, it's got to be training and a level that we started this session off with, which is, we're not taught these things. We don't understand those human universals. We don't understand that spectrum of being miserable to being over happy. Not over happy, but it's just to those extremes.
Yeah.
So, but we're not taught that. And that's why I think it's so important what we're trying to share here with the zyrrah generation and everything you talk about a choice, even when sometimes you feel like, with that choice, do I really have a choice? And so, but it's training that, yes, you do. And
Well, you don't have a choice all the time about the external situation you find yourself in.
right.
You don't get choices around that. They talk about the hand you were dealt with. They talk about, all these sorts of things. You just find we can't control what the government's going to do. We can't control how people are going to behave. The only thing we have, Michael, is that how do we choose to respond
Yes.
to any given situation we find ourselves in? Now, a situation might not be good at all. There might be nothing good about the situation we find ourselves in, but we still have the choice. We can go on about how bad it is and these things were always going to happen and, all the things and keep focusing on the bad. Or we can go, well, this is the situation I've found myself in.
Yes.
Now, what do I want to do with it?
And that applies both in the personal world, the business world, as you're describing that. It makes me think about, because I guess in your personal life, it is more emotional sometimes than in the business world. What I've struggled with personally, I can share with everybody, is bridging those two things. In the business world, you're right. I just gave an example of that. We're in a situation, and in the business world, I would say, let's pick the best of the worst situations. Here's where we are. What's our best, worst option? Basically. But I have struggled, like many people do, in the personal world with those things because it becomes emotional or it becomes personal. And what somebody could say to me or get me to overreact or react in a way I just didn't want to in the business world is a lot less than in a personal world.
That's true. And it's certainly true for you, in this situation. But we get other people. Do you know the number of people that seek professional help is also because of the experiences they've had at work and how people treated them. Okay.
Did not know that, actually.
In your situation, Michael, you're very comfortable, confident. You've got a good story around work, the messages you've got, how you've grown into it. You're quite comfortable with what you can create, do. It's not a story for you that creates any real issue. Okay. Yours will be somewhere else in the relationships or something in your
Yes.
life. You get other people, though, that work is quite a challenge for them because of stories. You're never going to be anything. You're never going to make
Mm,
anything of yourself. Bring that lens of threat. Michael, you just raised your eyebrow, so that means you don't agree with me, doesn't it?
right.
And you're really, you don't want me to be on this team with you, do you? You know, sort of thing. And
I'm glad you
because,
brought that up, Sue, because you shared an experience that I want you to share on. Do you remember when you talked about the audience and you're on the stage and there's an eye?
yes,
Talk
yeah.
a little bit about that.
When I first asked to speak publicly, I was in my probably late 20s and I'd never spoken before. Now, when I was growing up, I was always told that I was dramatic. You know, I used to want to do a sing or dance or something,
Mhm.
and my mother would say, "Oh, would you look at Susan? There she goes again," and tell her sisters about it, my aunties, and, you know, that I was dramatic and all of these sorts of things. Got to tell you, it had an impact on me. And then so when I had to first start to speak publicly, because I didn't come in a family where they sang, dance, or did anything like that, it was always very, um, everything was thought through and said appropriately, all those sorts of things. Anyway, when I first did my speaking engagement, I literally felt physically sick and my mouth was dry. I only had 5 minutes. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. It was one of the most terrible experiences I've ever experienced. And it didn't go away too quickly. I had to keep doing this thing as well. And so a couple of times I dreaded it, hated having to do it. No one else knew what I was feeling. It was me that was feeling it. And then one day I was having to give this conversation, and I happened to notice someone in the audience just going like this at me,
Hmm.
nodding. And when I saw them nod, it was a little bit of oxytocin that I got. It's like, so this isn't that bad? So you don't think I'm nonsense? So I have got something to say that's worthwhile saying? That kind of broke, it was like an intervention and broke what it was doing. Now, so over time, I started to see that gave me a little bit more confidence to say something else. And then I saw someone else nod and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then over time, I started to engage the audience more and, you know, so I could see, you know, and engaging, they were nodding. And I remember years later, someone said to me, Stu, I want you to do this event. You know, there's going to be about 100 people there. And it's like, only 100? Can't we get 10,000 to this? You know, because it became a form of entertainment. I don't sing and I don't dance, but I'm very comfortable in speaking and I love it. I love engaging with the audience. I love sharing this information. There's so much to explore. I just love it and have fun with you. I can't stand in front of a podium. I'm down with the audience, you know, having fun with all of this. And that's part of the thing is I allowed myself from those first days when I was terrified to seeing someone nod, started to give me the confidence. And then I started to ask questions and started to get a better perspective. Here's something else though. My mother thought I was being dramatic because in her world, she was not confident or didn't think that it was a good thing. You're much better being serious and doing all of this. So she was very uncomfortable. Now, my parents came to an event where I was speaking as well. And this helped me a lot too, you know, afterwards. They came up to me afterwards and went, wow, we did not know you could do that. Okay. They were amazed at seeing me, you know, speak and doing what I was. But to have my parents come up and my mother say, wow, I had no idea you could do that. She was so proud, you know, of what I had done. Now that started to change my story too, Michael,
That's
about
what I was
that.
going to get to. So now it goes back to the information you're consuming, and you took that information your mom gave you when you stood on that stage and you saw the head nodding. You're consuming that, and you're now changing your story.
And I
And
was able to become a little bit more curious. I was able to ask a little more questions. I never wanted to engage with the audience in case I couldn't handle what they said or they told me they didn't like what I was saying. So I'd never ask them any questions. And then when that first one happened, first of all, what happened is I started to get a little bit more confident in the content that I was presenting. okay, and then watching the response that I was getting. And then I got really brave and asked the audience, what do you think about that? Has that ever happened to you? And then you saw a lot of all
Right.
of this, and it was like, well, that was fun. I like that feeling. I'm going to try that one again. And so you developed over time, but I was walking those steps. My perspective was getting broader around what was possible. Curiosity was allowing me to try some things out. I remained objective in terms of what it was that I was doing. And now, from a person who was terrified, I love speaking.
And what I love about what you're saying, and clearly from your background as a psychologist and the many years you've put into studying and understanding this, not only helped yourself along the way, but you're helping so many others because you're teaching them how to actually change your story. What you consume matters. And then
Yeah,
I asked you, because sometimes we'll do it kind of in a spotted way. I'll do it a little bit here and there, and then I'll walk back into the same old patterns that are not
yeah,
healthy for me psychologically. And I think what I'm understanding, and I think what we want the people that hear your podcast, that are listening to this podcast, to understand is that you still have to take the time to train yourself. You have to invest in yourself. But what I think is so important is that you've taken all of this over so many years and put it into such a comprehensive program that can really help others train themselves to make these kind of stories
yeah,
the ones they want,
yeah.
not the ones they think are going to
Or the
happen,
ones they choose.
or the ones
Yeah,
they
yeah.
choose. And that goes back to your whole thing about choice.
Choice and step by step with this. It doesn't happen, but you get the little flickers of excitement straight away, you
Yeah.
know. So, my mission in life is to give everyone the best possible life experience available to them. Because what's the alternative? What's the alternative?
And that's why I think what you've created with Zyra is giving people the ability to feel that, to understand that very quickly. And
Yeah,
then when they like that feeling, and I can tell you everything you've explained, especially about oxytocin, that most people don't really, well, I guess today, to your point, know a little bit more about than I ever did growing up, but I knew I liked the feeling. And
yeah,
when I do change the story to the story I'm choosing, the one I want, I can feel that. When we even talk on this podcast about these things, I can feel that. And so I think what you've done with Zyra is so important because you do need to use it, and frequently, to keep that level of feeling that you
yeah,
want, because
yeah,
it's helping you make the choices.
yeah. Let me finish this up too on a note here as well. When I talk about renormalization, Michael, and renormalization is when someone changes their frame of reference in the way that they see the world, which is hopefully on that end of perspective and curiousness and exploration and all of that. With the renormalization, I have people that say to me, Michael, so are you going to brainwash me?
Mm,
And my response to that is, do you ever look at social media? Because we are exposed to information of every moment of every day of our lives. Okay. And it's not all good. And so when we are consuming all of that, it's like what you were talking about physical fitness. If you don't use your exercise, then you lose your physical fitness. Psychological well-being, which is what we're talking to, is exactly the same. You've got to keep injecting and investing into that. And if we just follow social media and the news reels around all the wars and the politics and all of that that's going on in the relationships and domestic violence, and I mean, you name it, you talk, it's all there, then that's the way we start to see the world and the human experience. But the other side of it exists well too. So this is why it's so important what you consume, to become aware of the choices you've got, and why building a community of the Zyra generation is so important to me in terms of having people that are curious and want to explore what's possible for them, and to get some of that training in, or at least to try it for themselves around how to understand what the brain is producing and what it's doing. But the power of the choices that we can make each and every day will determine the quality of life we live, and it's available to each and every one of us. You get to choose how much.
I think it's fascinating, Sue, and clearly the many years that you've put into this and now into an application that can help people around the world, I just think is fascinating. And it's a fascinating discussion about choice and consumption and chemistry and cortisol and oxytocin. When you think about all of those factors, how could you possibly, coming out of the womb and into the world, know how all of this affects you? And we need to teach people earlier,
Choice. How to make a
earlier,
choice.
and how to make
Can
it.
I finish this with a story, Michael?
Please.
And this story was one of my biggest lessons in life that I learned. So when I was a young psychologist working on the floor with offenders in prisons. Okay. And this offender came up to me this day and said, Sue, when I get out of jail, can I come and work with you on these things? Because when you're here, I feel like my life can be different. But when you go away, everything goes back to the way it was. And I'm thinking it's not possible. Right. Now, Michael, my response was, I took a breath. I had very young children at the time. It was one thing for me to work behind the prison walls with offenders. I didn't want them coming to me outside the prison walls. I was worried, what about if they bring others, they didn't like me, they know where I live or my kids or all of those sorts of things. Now, so I was really uncomfortable with all of this and wasn't sure what to do. Part of me just wanted to help because that's what we do, but the bigger part of me didn't want to associate outside of the prison walls. Now, I never had to address that though, because this particular offender was transferred to another prison and we lost contact. But it was nearly 10 years later, Michael, one of my colleagues and that came up to me and said, oh, did you hear about D, sort of thing. And I went, no, what's happened? Oh, he rehabilitated and he's now a concert pianist. Okay. And I went, oh, goodness. Now here's the learning. I could now interact with this person because he's a concert pianist. I couldn't and didn't want to while he had the label offender.
Yes.
But the label concert pianist, and that was me. And I was a young psychologist at the time. And that's where it really hit home to me. The judgments that we have and the stories that we tell ourselves doesn't just affect us. It affects those that we're interacting with as well too. And 95% of the time, our judgments, our stories and our interactions and what we are not true. They are false. And that story has stayed with me forever. So I would say to everyone tonight, you do have choices. And we would like you to remain and be a part of the Zyrrah generation as we continue to explore some of these principles even further, because I want you to know that you can make choices and there's a whole lot of possibilities out there that you can be making choices and be curious enough to want to explore so that you can have that experience and that feeling that you're living the best possible life available to you, because what's the alternative?
Fascinating discussion, Sue. Looking forward to next week.
Me too, Michael.
That's the Zyrrah Generation podcast for this week. Want to know where your happiness actually sits? Register free at zyrrah.app to know your score and find out how to be a little happier every day.